We're here with Jeannette Wing. Jeannette, tell us a little bit about your background. You have a very strong academic background.
Yes, I was at Carnegie Mellon University for over 27 years, where I was department head twice. And before that, I was actually at the University of Southern California for 2 years. And I got all my degrees at MIT. So I had been in academia for basically my whole career, my whole professional life. I did have a stint at the National Science Foundation for 3 years, and that exposed me to how DC really works.
And what was the path that led you here to Microsoft?
Well, I have always had friends at Microsoft. Certainly Rick Rashid was at Carnegie Mellon when I was a very young faculty member, and I saw him be swooped up by Microsoft to start Microsoft Research. And I have watched from afar in academia of how Microsoft Research grew up over the 22, 23 years now. And so I've always been a friend of Microsoft. And also, I myself spent a sabbatical at Microsoft Research in 2002, 2003, and I had a great time.
And what were the things that interested you most about Microsoft Research?
Well, as an academic, as a researcher myself, there were two areas of research that overlapped in my interest with Microsoft Research. One was the whole trustworthy computing effort that was going on, and that started with Bill Gates' 2001 memo, and in fact that's what brought me to Microsoft Research in 2002 and 2003, because I read that memo and I said, well, what does trustworthy computing really mean? And I figured the only way I'm going to find out is if I come to Microsoft Research and work within Microsoft Research to find out what TWC really means. And the other area of interest, research interest that overlaps, is actually the group that hosted me was run by Jim Larris. It was the Software Productivity Tools Group or something like that, SPT. And at the time, they were showing how formal methods, which is my first research area of interest, in terms of theorem proving and model checking and static analysis, could be used in practice to scale. And it was the heyday of the SLAM project. And I was very lucky, I felt very lucky to be here when all of that tech transfer was happening between Microsoft Research and the rest of the company.
What is computational thinking?
Computational thinking is the thought processes for formulating a problem and expressing a solution to that problem in a way that a computer, a human or a machine, can effectively carry out. Now that's quite a mouthful of a definition, and I used words like effectively, solution, problem, expressing quite carefully because there are technical meanings to those terms. But let me put it more simply. I like to think of computational thinking as just the thought processes that a computer scientist would use in solving a problem. And that begs the question of, what are those ways a computer scientist approaches problem solving? And many of the ways that we learn in computer science are just, the concepts. But the most important thought process that all computer scientists use in problem solving is abstraction. The ability to ignore all the irrelevant, complex details of the problem at hand and look at a higher level of what are the relevant parts of the problem that I need to tackle, that I need to address. And the ability to decompose a problem into smaller pieces, solve the smaller pieces, and put together a solution to the whole problem by putting together the solution to the smaller pieces. Those kinds of thought processes of abstraction, decomposition, composition are the bread and butter techniques of a computer scientist kind of on a day-to-day basis. And I strongly believe that anyone and everyone can learn these concepts and learn and how to use them and apply them in daily life.
At what age is it appropriate for a child to begin thinking this way, and how does one become better at computational thinking?
Well, I have been advocating that computational thinking is for everyone. And I think that already from the undergraduate programs through graduate programs and beyond, people have already embraced the importance of computational thinking. So now the challenge is to address the K through 12 level. Now, what would it mean to teach a kindergartner what computer science is and what good computing can do for him or her when you're 5 years old?
Yeah.
And I think that's still an interesting research question, not just for computer scientists, in fact, but I would challenge the education scientists, the cognitive scientists, the learning scientists to ask the question, what kind of computing concepts would make sense to teach to a kindergartner? And I think there are actually already programs out there that address that question. So for instance, there's a program out there called CS Unplugged, which is teaching little kids all about computer science without a computer. And so for instance, you can teach a sorting algorithm by lining up a whole bunch of kids and telling them they need to be sorted in a particular way, and maybe they discover how to sort themselves, like the height of the children, and maybe they discover on their own a particular sorting algorithm, and then you can ask, is there a more efficient way? And so they can actually discover on their own the different kinds of sorting algorithms.
Interesting. So this might date me, but I remember when I was a child reading stories about how big a computational problem DNA sequencing was, for example, and that it might not even be done in my lifetime. And in hindsight, that's kind of laughable. What are the big problems that we're facing today? What are the big data problems that are the equivalent of that?
Well, so big data is clearly a buzzword these days, and I think that certainly every sector, every science, every engineering discipline, every professional sector, when I say sector, law, medicine, humanities, and then all the sciences, astronomy, biology, and so on, they are facing this big data problem in terms of generating lots of data with, say, scientific instruments like the Large Hadron Collider, collecting lots of data through sensors. So we've got sensor nets that span the globe, all in real time, collecting lots of data, and then processing all this data and then generating metadata on top of that. And you can imagine, and that's just say for one scientific discipline. Now you'd like to put it all together. You'd like different, in principle, you'd like all these streams of data to come together and all of us to make some sense out of it. And I like to talk about not just big data, but I like to talk about from data to knowledge to action. So from all this data, which is just a lot of bits, you'd like to actually extract some interesting information, some knowledge, some semantics from this data. And then from the representation of that knowledge, and it's usually going to be visual, a human being or some bot eventually will make a decision, make an intelligent decision on that knowledge. So the one example is if we look at some work, for instance, being done at my